10 years ago, I thought I would be making music for Warcraft 4 by now. Not only does Warcraft 4 not even exist, but I'm not making music for anything Warcraft related. The reality is, I've shipped 5 games in 12 years as a video game composer. For those who are new here, hi, hello. I'm Tony Manfredonia. I'm a composer and singer-songwriter, and I have spent the last 12 years working in the video game industry as well as a bunch of other music stuff. And I wanted to make this video. Working in games has been the longest part of my career, and I thought it'd be kind of interesting to share sort of a 10-year retrospective on my experiences in the industry. I've got some sparkling water. We're gonna take a deep dive. I'm gonna share sort of my experiences and all of that. Before we start though, a couple things. This is a great video to put on the background. I'm not gonna have any fancy visuals. I promise, maybe a couple images here and there, but this is gonna be pretty podcast style. I also wanna make sure that I share my priorities from where I'm coming with all of this. My top priority is feeding my family. Point blank, music related or not, feeding my family is numero uno in what it is that I want to provide for this world. My mission and how to go about that is my number 2 thing, which is music, right? So that could be scoring media, that could be performing, that could be singing, songwriting, production, orchestration, arrangements, classical pieces. Really, it doesn't matter. It's just making music. For me, music has always been something I like to do and I enjoy of all shapes and sizes. I'll be talking more about that soon. So that's number 2. Third most important thing is that my philosophy is, with everything in life, is work to live, not live to work. And that's a big one. That is one that I really have struggled with from a more social perspective. And again, we'll get to that. But those are the 3 things. Number 1, keep my family fed. Number 2, I love music of all shapes and sizes. And number 3, work to live, not live to work. Let's get started. 10-year retrospective starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's go way, way, way back in time. When I first started making music, I was 16, right? I did a lot of music things prior to that, but when I first started writing music, I was 16. I was a relatively late bloomer as far as composers go. You always see the bios and they're like, well, I wrote my first piece when I was 2.5. I'm like, great. That's not me though. No judgments. It's just, I was a late bloomer. Before getting into games, despite growing up with soundtracks, I loved singing, right? I listened primarily to alt rock, Coldplay, Keane, Muse, Brit rock, basically, of the early 2000s. I always sort of pictured my musical journey when I started writing my own music was more so like being in a stadium, right? In front of a crowd of whatever it is, 30,000, rocking out on stage. I always had sort of the idea of with like an orchestra behind me too. Like that was always, I always loved orchestra stuff. So like that was sort of the dream. Here's the truth. I was horribly afraid of sort of being seen, quote unquote. And I'm not talking like on a stage. I actually had no problem and still have no problem of being in front of people. I don't mind that, but I'm talking like being seen from like a deeply emotional, philosophical perspective, like people seeing me and knowing about my story and knowing everything there was to know about me through my words and my lyrics and whatever it is. I was afraid of being seen that way. And admittedly, I was also just surrounded by peers who didn't really take my songwriting very seriously. In music school, they were like, oh, one day you'll love Messiaen and you'll hate Coldplay. And I'm like, here I am 20 years later and I love Coldplay and I'm not crazy about Messiaen. Again, no judgments, but it's just personal taste. So a lot of my interests were downplayed as I was getting started. And that hurt. That hurt deeply as someone who was kind of not emotionally stable as a young 18-year-old. So games was like a safe place for me. Games became, I could write music and no one had to know what I looked like. No one had to know who I was. I could just write music, not be seen, not be touched, not be heard, just here's the music, here's the asset. But the love of performing never left. Despite all of that, the love of performing never left. It was just kind of buried under fear and doubt and anxiety. Here's the thing, like I never once said, I want to be a video game composer. And I want to make sure that I say I'm extraordinarily grateful to be able to do this and feed my family making music for games. But I am not one of those people that ever said, truly, I want to be a video game composer. I want that. That's like the dream for me. That never happened. Sure, my musical influences from Final Fantasy to Legend of Zelda to Kirby and all of the great games of the late 90s, early 2000s, but that was also in this melting pot of being influenced by Coldplay and Keane and Bach and Frank Sinatra. I loved all of that musical variety. Like I went from literally, no joke, I wrote like my first song and it has terrible lyrics and no one will ever hear it. To then writing a bassoon concerto, like literally the next week. And I have to say that bassoon concerto is still on my hard drive, and no, you're not gonna hear it. How did I get into games then? My first real gig was as an assistant for Two Brothers. This is a game by Axe Studios, came out, gosh, back in 2013, 2014. But it was as an assistant. I was writing kind of sheet music and MIDI data and sending that over, and I didn't have to do any production, literally zero. I literally thought writing game music was like you notate something in Sibelius and you send the note performer or whatever it was, Sibelius sounds at the time, and the sheet music, and then someone else just magically does the rest. I'm telling you, I was extraordinarily naive. So that was my entry point into games. There was literally a friend of mine saying, hey, need some help? Do you want to help? And I said, sure, that sounds cool. I finished that, but then I realized I needed to learn how to produce. Once I kind of understood what had to be done to make the music sound good, I had to learn what a DAW was and what music production was. I was like, what is Cubase, So I took about a year or two to really dive into that. And I wasn't great, but I was certainly learning. So in 2015, I landed 3 gigs somehow. I won't say all of them because none of them came out, and I want to respect the privacy of the developers. But there is one does live on. It's called Super Toaster X, and it was in early access, or there was a demo. You can find it on Steam. You can still hear the trailer music, and it's a terrible mix. But I give myself a nice C+ for effort. So needless to say, that was 2015 to 2017. Out of frustration, I was like, okay, I worked on 3 games, got paid to do them, but they never came out. So I got really frustrated. So I said, what am I going to do next? I'm going to write an opera, because why not? So I wrote an opera. It got performed. I learned very quickly in the process. We workshopped it and stuff in 2018. Very grateful. The team was great. Everything was great. But I learned very quickly that it was not for me, right? I'm more of a musical theater guy. I'm more of jazz hands kind of guy. Then came Charon's Crypt, right? Charon's Crypt, The Ambassador, Fractured Timelines, and Call of Saragnar. Those are the 3 games that in the midst of doing this opera thing, there was an opportunity there. I said, you know what? Let me give this another try. I'm going to give it one more shot. I worked on Charon's Crypt and The Ambassador from about 2018 to 2020. Both games came out around that time. I think Ambassador came out 2020, and then Charon's Crypt was 2021. During all of this, I signed on to Call of Saragnar. That game is still in development. While working on Call of Saragnar, I signed on to a couple more games, both of which fizzled out. Again, won't say what they're called out of respect for the devs. But then I signed on to Evercraft Online, which is now known as Audrillon Online Adventures. That's still going strong. In fact, I just finished a track for them yesterday. So that's still going. But I signed on to that in 2021 and it's still going, which is fine. No complaints. I'm not saying there's an issue. I'm just sharing the reality that Call of Saragnar is still going and Audrillon Online Adventures, big game, both big games actually, and they're still going. They're still in development. They're not shipped yet. Now we're getting into NDA territory, so I'm not going to be able to mention names here, but 2022, I signed on to a very big project in terms of, scope and scale. Finished writing that music. I'm still in the process of mixing it and cleaning it up and implementing it and all of that. That was a 3-year project, 2022 to 2025. I'm talking fugues, giant boss battle type stuff. Then in 2024 was when I signed on to Minecraft for their Universal Studios DLC, which I'm very grateful for. That was such a blast to write. And then more recently, I also signed on to Horizons of Achaea and 2 more that I cannot talk about. I forgot to mention too, that I also did some additional music for Y2K, a postmodern RPG, right after I finished Two Brothers. So we've got, in a 12-year time span, we've got Two Brothers, Y2K, Charon's Crypt, The Ambassador, Fractured Timelines, Minecraft. Those are the shipped titles. 5 games, 12 years. So why do I say any of this? The disconnect between expectation and reality. When I first got started, when you think about, okay, what am I going to be doing 12 years from now, 10 years from now? You often think much bigger than what might actually happen. Now, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of people, they say, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing in 10 years. And maybe that happens in 2, right? They have some tremendous success, which is wonderful. But in my case, I was surrounded by a bunch of people who, on Twitter and elsewhere and TigSource forums and all this stuff, where they were maybe working on games for 5 years and they shipped 20 titles by then. But for me, I always felt weird. I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been getting paid to do this for a long time. I've been literally paying for my house doing this. And I have 5 shipped titles to my name. That's not an issue at all. It's just a difference in what actually happened in 10 years versus what I expected would happen. I literally thought the game composing cycle was write music for one project, ship that, move on to the next project. It looks nothing like that. It's a bunch of moving parts all at once, and suddenly it's 10 years down the road, and I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened, you know? The reality is like long dev cycles, NDA, not being able to share like over 3 hours of music at this point and just waiting to be able to do that. These weird little things that you don't realize are going to happen until you're in the midst of it. The lesson that I learned from this is to not chase fame. We live in an era where engagement farming and like, you just want the likes, you want the retweets, you want all that stuff. If you're in it for that, there's going to be a part of the journey that may be challenging because you may not be able to do that. So lesson 1 is to not chase the fame, but rather just to enjoy the process. And then maybe lesson 2 for myself was to just drop expectations. Just do the work, wake up the next day, rinse, repeat, and pray for the best. That my path will look different than someone else's, and their path is going to look different than someone else's, and everyone's going to just look different. I need a sip of my sparkling. So despite doing a couple AAA things, Minecraft and NDA here, there's really 2 main paths. There's studio composer, right? Say working for Riot or working for Blizzard. You are there, you are making music for them. Or the indie route, which is largely what I do, where I'm like working on too many projects all at once, and it's messy, but it's fun because the teams are smaller, there's more camaraderie, it's good. But the reality, the nature of the work is in indie land, rates will change. You may find an indie studio who can give you $1,000 per minute of music, but you will also find $200 per minute of music, right? It's gonna vary greatly. So the only things that I was ever able to control, or what we can control, is just the quality of our music and sending it out there and who we talk to. That's it. Everything else, budgets, schedules, release timelines, everything else is out of your control. Point being, things can become very creatively draining and exhausting very quickly, right? So a lot of times I'll see newcomers say, oh, I'm so excited to be a video game company, you just write music all day. Sometimes that ends up being way more challenging than you realize. At least that's what happened to me, in that a lot of the music that I've worked on, where it's just giant, dense boss battle type stuff all the time, overlapping, right? Like literally including fugues and fugal passages and all this contrapuntal stuff for the purposes of the track, it gets very exhausting very quickly. Imagine doing that type of boss battle for one project when you're on board for 4 projects at once. It can be very draining, and I didn't realize that going into it. So what I have learned, or what I've tried to do, is to not just brute force writing all the time every day, which can be done, but it's brutal. But instead to balance that out, kind of like a little triforce of things, which is composing, performing, teaching, right? So I teach with ThinkSpace, I tutor orchestration for them, performing as a singer-songwriter, as an organist, playing for weddings, doing that type of stuff, concerts, events, and then composing, right? Because each one of those compartments uses a different part of my headspace, which leaves me more room for creativity for when I'm actually writing stuff, or for when I'm trying to figure out where do we want to go for dinner? Because I'm telling you, when you work on nothing but a giant fugue boss battle that lasts 3.5 minutes over the course of 2 days on top of other stuff, the last thing you want to think about is like, what are we going to eat for dinner today? Like, I know that sounds ridiculous, but at least that's been my experience. Then let's talk about the psychological challenges that I've had over the last 10 years. The fact that I live in rural Michigan, I am not near any other developer at all geographically, physically, in person. I've had to build everything completely on the internet to stand out and to be in front of people. That also comes with seeing and interacting with everyone completely on the internet. Very frequently in the game audio scene, you'll see people who talk about nothing but game audio, game music, video games, game design. I'm not judging. That's fine. If they want to do that, that's great. But as someone who is not like that at all, like I'm telling you, as someone who's like, here's a new song that's kind of like Coldplay meets Frank Sinatra, and ooh, like I'm seeing this classical concert, and oh my gosh, this jazz trio is amazing, and I'm geeking out about the cows that live down the road. That is the life that I like to live. I've often felt like a black sheep because of it. I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying it has very frequently felt like that because my only other interactions with people who work in games is on the internet when people are very brand focused, very kind of niche focused. Another thing too is like there's such a push about implementation and immersion and, kind of this perfect marriage between visuals and ambient subdued audio. For me, I just love making big melodies. I like making big music. And I'm so grateful that the projects that I've been on have allowed me to just kind of make big music, like Octopath Traveler style, where the music just isn't afraid to just be in your face. That's what I prefer. And I've been so grateful to find fellow like-minded people who also are like that as a composer, but it's also met with sort of the narrative, if you want to call it, about creating this perfect blend of immersion and all of that. Again, not inherently bad, but as someone whose only interactions with people are on the internet, largely, unless I'm at an event or something, it can just kind of play with your mind a bit. Another thing that has been hard on the internet is like this, it's very passion driven. Nothing wrong with that. Want to emphasize that greatly. There is nothing wrong with this industry being very passion driven. I think that's good. I think that's helpful. But again, as someone for me who looks at it as like, yes, I'm passionate about writing music, but I'm more passionate about feeding my family. I look at it as a job, right? That is really my philosophy. If I keep myself looking at it as a job, I don't get too discouraged when I get rejected, nor do I get to kind of put myself too high on a pedestal if something goes well. It's just, okay, this is the job. This is what I do. Finish it, move on, right? It keeps me grounded. The other thing too is, as a singer-songwriter, just a brief tangent into that territory, when I got into games, none of my sort of musical enjoyment of songwriting or singing or processing emotions ever changed, right? I think we also see on the day and age of the internet of like niche down, like you are a video game composer, or you are a film composer, or you are in a band, and that's it. That's all you do. But that couldn't be further from the truth for me, right? So it's like when I got into games, I never really thought of it as like I'm replacing the songwriting, or I'm getting rid of the other stuff. I'm getting rid of the classical stuff. It was just an avenue. Kind of like, when you know someone and they work in a trade, like they're a plumber or they're a woodworker or something. I don't think they grew up saying, oh, I want to be a woodworker. Maybe some. But some probably just do it. Maybe it was a family business. They inherit it. They do it. It's their gift. They're gifted at it. So they do it. I kind of look at scoring for games very similarly, right? It's like, I've always liked writing music, and it's just an avenue for me to do. And it's not like the end all be all. For me, it's like music is like processing emotion, right? So the songwriting for me is like if you want to call that the dream, quote unquote, like that's where I want to just keep doing it and grow and see things change and move. Working in games for me is like, okay, I just need the next job and the next gig and the next to keep things going, right? To feed the family. So it's an interesting dynamic that I find I've really struggled to find like-minded people in that regard. Maybe not necessarily with songwriting in games, but maybe film and games, or in a band and games, or whatever it is, as a touring drummer and also scoring games, whatever it may be. I've really struggled to find people who also sort of live in that realm of existence. So if that's you, if you're listening to this, that's you, please comment below, because I'd love to connect with you. Funnily enough, doing the songwriting actually landed me 2 video game gigs. So I'm actually really glad that I didn't let myself niche down in that regard. But yeah, it was in early 2020 when there was a lot of difficult times in my family, with death and loss and stuff. And I had nowhere to put it, right? Because I spent basically 5 years at that point just focusing on games and nothing but games to kind of get the ball rolling, to get the work coming in. That when all of that loss happened, I was like, this has to go somewhere. Like, so that's when the songwriting sort of returned, was early 2020. And so after a decade of working in games, I realized that there's no point in trying to create 2 separate paths. There's no point in trying to say, here's Tony, the video game composer, with that set of profiles, and here's Tony, the singer-songwriter, with an acronym name and over there. No, they are colliding forever and always at this point. And my hope is that I find people who also like that and appreciate that and want to see more of that, especially like in a live orchestra setting. Like, could you imagine an orchestra concert where it's like a video game soundtrack followed by some big orchestra vocal ballad, followed by like a classical piece, and rinse, repeat, like cycling through that? That's just so cool to me. I wish there was more of that. So, but the challenge was letting myself actually no longer hide, right? Again, for those first 5 years, when games was really kind of this place of hiding for me, like I didn't have to be seen. Coming back out with the songwriting stuff, it's like, okay, well, I have to face that fear now. Like, I have to embrace this reality. Like, this is what I love to do in addition to my scoring work, embracing that reality and just doing it and just going out there and doing it, to not be afraid of being seen. So the big takeaways: composing can be just a job. There are going to be times when it really hurts and you're exhausted. There's going to be times where it's like, man, this is really cool. Like, I'm really grateful I landed this gig. But at the end of the day, it's okay if you also just look at it as a job. It is a job. It is work to do. Nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be obsessed with it 24/7. You can write your music and then spend the rest of your waking days and life listening to Jimmy Buffett, if that's what you prefer. But you're really good at scoring games and you just know how to do it, so you do it. That's fine. That's fine. Embrace who you are. Another thing too is less is more. I think in the indie world, this is something I'm still trying to navigate, is like, okay, well, I need the money, but I also need my sanity. But so sometimes it's like, if you need the money, you take on a lot of projects at once, it can get a little hectic. But if you don't take on enough, well, then you're like also feeling iffy because you're like, well, I need the money. It is a vicious cycle. I don't know the answer to this one, but just to be aware that it happens, that it's going to happen. One thing, and I know I said at the very beginning, I wasn't going to make this a do's or don'ts, but I cannot encourage all of you out there enough who are listening to this. Don't box yourself in. If you sing and write, then sing and write. Don't throw your voice away. Don't throw your performance away. If you also like to perform, if you want to make music with lyrics as a project, like under your name and release soundtracks, do it. Because if nothing else, you'll have me over here as like a #1 fan, because I think that's beautiful and I think that's wonderful. If you love multiple genres, do them all. Don't box yourself in. Don't shrink yourself to fit the mold of what you may see on the internet in this industry or from other people, because you're going to meet people whose life, blood, and entire life dream is to make music for games. And that's great. And that's a beautiful thing. But if that's not you, that doesn't mean you also can't work in the industry making music for games. You can do that and be a church musician. You can do that and be a performing artist. You can do that and score films and make music for sync. It does not matter. It doesn't have to be your only obsession in order for it to happen. I promise. So if like 2012 Tony, when I really got my first kind of paid gig in the game industry, said and looked at Tony now, probably say like, wait, didn't you want to be a singer-songwriter? And he was right. But I'm also extraordinarily grateful that I have games, that I work in games, and I love working in games. It's part of the income hole that feeds my family. It keeps me writing, and it gives me, frankly, it gave me a job that I literally didn't even dream of. Like, it just kind of happened. And I'm so grateful for that. And so my dream now, though, with all of this in mind, is to keep writing music for whatever I need to write music for. I'm going to keep writing music for games, but I'm also going to keep building my dreams as a singer-songwriter, to build that career in the way that I always wanted when I started writing music at 16 years old. And one day, I plan on doing a big orchestra concert in a stadium with video game soundtrack music included and singer-songwriter music at the same time, because why not? So anyway, I hope this retrospective was helpful, or at least gave you some perspective about what it can look like when you've been doing this for so long. I have no idea what the next 10 years are going to look like. Like I said, I'm just going to show up, do the job in front of me, and keep going. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being here, and take care.